What's going on, guys? It's Ken, and in today's video I wanted to cover the 4 basic tips I have for learning how to do the conventional deadlift first. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we go into the tips of the actual deadlift, I want to go ahead and give you an idea of what the deadlift actually works out. You're looking at your back, you're looking at your glutes, you're looking at your hamstrings, basically all of your posterior chain. Now, for those who don't know what a posterior chain is, posterior means your back. So your back chain, meaning that everything in your back. You're talking your upper back, your lower back, your glutes, your hamstrings, and so forth and so forth. Traps, all that good stuff. So the deadlift is one of the main lifts for powerlifting, and it's probably the most that people can do the most weight with because it recruits the most amount of muscles, and that's why people love doing the deadlifts. It's, you know, one of the strongest compound movements you could ever do. Okay, so moving forward, any of the tips that we go and cover today, I want you guys to keep in mind to take it one at a time. Just because that I give these tips out doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing them and thinking about them all at the same time. You know, it takes time to make sure that you're able to do these things one at a time. If you're smart enough to do them all at the same time and you can remember all of the tips, great, go ahead and do it. But if not, go ahead and do only 2 sets of 5 reps of each of the tips. So tip 1, once you hear it, once you learn it, then go ahead and do tip 1, 2 sets of 5 reps. And make sure that you do it until you remember the feeling of what it feels like to do tip 1, or you keep tip 1 in mind. Then you go ahead and move on to tip 2. Move on to tip 2, do 2 sets of 5 again. Keep doing that with tips 3 and 4 also, until you get an idea of what these sensations on your body should be like. And then before you know it, you'll be able to master the deadlift. I recently ran into a guy that just started lifting, and I'll try to show a video of him doing his deadlift when I first saw him. And if you're looking at it, you could tell that his lower back was really rounded when he was pulling. And so the way that we had to fix that was, I told him, if you've ever gone clubbing or if you've ever gone dancing with someone, there's a tendency for the girls to kind of like try to stick their butt out for the guy while they're dancing. And since his lower back was rounding so much, I went ahead and told him, I was like, you know, kind of pretend to be like you're the girl, you know. And so it helped him in the long run. So you try to stick your butt out when you first start out. You want your hips going away from the bar, and while you kind of lean forward, and you should feel your hamstrings kind of being activated. You should feel a really tight tension on both your hamstrings and your butt. The best way you can tell whether or not you can feel your hamstrings being stretched is if you go ahead and try to touch your toes while your knees are only slightly bent. And you'll feel it on the back of your legs. That's how you know that your hamstrings are loaded or they're stressed. And that's the position that you want to be in at first. Better? Good. Pass out. Good. Now, just to keep in mind, just because you stick your butt out, there is a possibility that you may be what they call hyperextending your lower back. What that basically means is that your lower back is arching too much, and it looks like this too much, as opposed to rounding, which may look like this. So most people that have a hard time with their lower back rounding like this, when they try to stick their butt out and they try to hyperextend, it actually ends up being straight. Most people who can already do a straight back like this and they try to stick their butt out a little too much will end up hyperextending. So you want to keep that in mind, because you don't want to get your lower back injured or hurt trying to do the deadlift. So overall, that's tip number 1, is stick your butt out away from the bar and kind of have your chest drop down in the, when you first start out, feeling the tension on your butt and your hamstrings. So tip number 2, using the lats. Now, when you're first starting out, it's very hard to try to feel your lats over here when you're using it for the deadlift. Ultimately, what a lot of people will tell you to do is they want you to try to bend the bar. Now, if you're starting out, that doesn't necessarily make any sense, because if you're just holding on the bar like this and you try to bend it, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're activating your lats. So what you want to try to do is, instead of just thinking about bending the bar, grab the bar and you want to drop the shoulders. So what that looks like is you go like this. And when you drop the shoulders, you will kind of naturally feel your lats kind of drop down. Another thing that you want to try to do when you drop your shoulders is you want to push your chest out. So now that's why people say bend the bar, because now it looks like you're bending the bar. So once you put your shoulders down and you squeeze like this, now it looks like you're bending the bar. So the second tip is, once you get done getting set with your hamstrings and stressing on the hamstrings, then you grab the bar and you squeeze your lats. What that will naturally do is that will naturally pull the bar towards you, and that way it'll reduce the distance between where the bar is in relative to your shin. If your shin is here, the bar will naturally go like this, because once you do this motion, if you notice my hands go down, if I'm holding onto a bar, the bar will naturally go towards me. See? So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3. Now, once you have your hamstrings loaded and your lats flexed out, or I should say, like, now you're bending the bar, the third tip that you want to focus on is making sure that the bar starts in the middle of your foot. Okay, if the bar is too close to your shin, your hips will rise first when you start the deadlift. What that means is now you're putting more stress on the hamstrings and your glutes and your lower back. Okay, most people in that position will be weaker than as if they had the bar in the middle of their foot. Now, on the opposite spectrum, if you have the bar in front of your foot, then you're gonna start off in a very bad position, and the bar is naturally gonna want to try to go towards you and go up as you try to figure out what position you're strongest in. Your body will naturally be in the strongest position once you try to pull the bar towards you and once you actually start doing the deadlift. So tip number 3 is make sure that the bar starts in the middle of your foot. Question then becomes, how do I know that the bar is in the middle of my foot? Easy. Pick a shoelace. I'm just kidding. No, but ultimately, yeah, you want to look at your shoe and you kind of want to see where the middle of your foot is. You know, if you're just looking at your foot, you know, you kind of have an idea of where the middle of your foot is. And once you put on your shoes, once you have your shoes on, just keep a shoelace in mind. Just keep a shoelace in mind of where you think the middle of your foot is, and just make sure that right before you pull the deadlift, that your shoe is being covered by the bar at that exact area. So if I'm picking shoelace number 4 or whatever, the bar should be covering that shoelace when I'm about to pull on the deadlift. So that's tip number 3, making sure the bar is in the middle of the foot. Tip number 4, and this is the last tip, but this is probably one of the most important tips also to making sure that you're able to deadlift safely. When you get done locking out with the deadlift, when you put the deadlift back down, when you put the bar back down, you have to make sure that you stay tight also, or at least make sure that your lower back is not rounding when you're dropping the weight. So the 4th tip is, just because you're able to pull it up, make sure that you're also keeping your lower back stay tight at the same way that you started out with putting the bar down. And that's just for a safety precaution, just so that you're not injuring your lower back in the long run. Hopefully, guys, those 4 tips were able to help you out with how to deadlift, the 4 tips to a successful and healthy deadlift in the long run. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know, and I will go ahead and try to help you out the best that I can. Please like the video and subscribe if you can, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.